Welcome to the next installment in my video lecture series for microeconomic principles. And in this particular video lecture, I'm going to be taking a look at the differences between private goods and public goods. In particular, how we determine the market demand for each of these goods. So as you see here, we have a private good. And what I always tell students is that you come up with similar prices or the prices and you add the quantities across the prices. So let me actually draw in a line here to illustrate this particular point. So if you see here that for prices above 6, nobody in this market, the only two people in this market are represented by these two demand curves, D1 in red and D2 in blue. So for prices above 6, quantity demanded is going to be equal to 0. So for any prices in this range up in here, we're going to have a demand, the quantity demand is going to be equal to 0. As I migrate the price downward, what you're going to notice is that the first demand curve that we hit is D2. So for prices between 6 and 3, the only part of the demands of these two demands that we're going to be interested in is D2, because for any price above 3, D1 is not going to purchase. So the only part of this market demand curve, and we're assuming that there's only two individuals in this market, when we add these together, D2 is the only demand curve that matters for prices between 6 and 3. So I always tell students to visualize that if you take a line and you bring it down, you see that the quantity demand is going to be equal to 0. Once we hit 6, we're going to have a positive quantity demanded, and the market demand is only going to be equal to D2. So as prices migrate downward, it's still D2. It gets down to 4, it's still D2, only D2. And then when we get down to 3, we have to worry about D1. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to draw in another line and superimpose it over D2, and let me just change the formatting of it so it's a little bit easier to see. All right. So that portion, that hash marked line right here, is the market demand curve, and it's equal to D2 because for prices between 3 and 6, D2 is the only individual who's going to be purchasing this good. Now, as the price migrates below 3, we can see that we are intersecting two demand curves. We're going to have to add two demand curves together. So the summation of this is going to be D1 and D2. And usually what I tell students to do is that imagine that the price is equal to 0. And we know that for D1, the quantity demanded is equal to 3. And that for D2, the quantity demanded is equal to 5. So if I add 3 and 5 together, that will give me the market demand at a price of 0. So let me draw that in and go back to this point here and bring that line there. So this is the market demand curve, those cross-sectional lines there. So make sure you're comfortable with that, because that's how we come up with the market demand for private goods. What we do is we go and we look at the prices and we add the quantities at those prices, and just realize that you can have a situation where at high enough prices, the market demand curve is going to be equivalent to the demand curve of one of the individuals. In this instance here, the market demand curve is equal to D2 for prices between 3 and 6. And then once the price is below 3, we add D1 and D2 together. For public goods, what we do is we look at the quantities and then add up the prices. So remember previously, if I bring this back up here, I told you one way to visualize it is to take a look at a line along the price axis, the y-axis, and have it migrate downward, and that will tell you which of the demand curves is important, as you can see right here. For a public good, we do the same thing, except we do it for quantities. So let me put this line in here, and let me change that so it's not got the cross sections on there. So we do the same exact procedure, except now we're going to move along the x-axis for the quantities. So if we do the same thing here, that for any quantities above 5, neither one of these are operational. As the quantity falls, until we get to the point we intersect D2. So the market demand for this public good is only going to be D2 for quantities between 5 and 3. That's the only demand curve that this vertical line is intersecting between those quantities. So from a quantity of 5 to 3, the market demand for this public good is just going to be D2. So let me draw that in here. There you go. So that for quantities between 5 and 3, D1 is going to be the demand, the overall demand for this public good. If we keep moving along, we hit 3, and what do we notice? We are intersecting 2 demand curves. So now we have to add D1 and D2 together to get the total demand for this particular market good. And we do the same thing as we did previously. We look, except now we look at a quantity of 0. At a quantity of 0, the price willing to be paid by D1 is 3, and for D2 is equal to 6. So if we add those two together, that will tell us what the price is going to be for this public good when the quantity is equal to 0. So I go to the point where D1 is now operational, and if we have 3 and 6, we add those two together, and that gives us the total demand for this public good. So make sure you remember what the difference is between those two. It's something that students oftentimes get confused about. For private goods, we take a look at the price, and then we add the quantities at those prices to give us the market demand. For a public good, we do the same thing, except we do it for quantities. We look at quantities, and then we add the prices for those quantities.